I flew home from Brazil to surprise my grandmother for her 85th birthday. Instead, I found her starving in a storage closet. That's the moment I stopped being their son and became their landlord. My parents told everyone she was in a luxury facility. It was a lie. While they partied in Jamaica on her credit cards, I was buying every debt they owed, legally. The humid Atlanta night clung to my skin like a second layer of shame as I climbed the brick wall of my childhood home, my dress shoes scraping against mortar that felt older and more tired than I remembered. I had crossed oceans, navigating the chaotic ports of Rio de Janeiro and the tense boardrooms of Santos, all to fix problems that seemed impossible. Yet nothing in that world of high-stakes logistics could have prepared me for the silent, rotting heart of 4,400 Paces Ferry Road. My flight from Brazil had touched down just hours before, a surprise visit orchestrated for my grandmother's 85th birthday. Instead of laughter and cake, I was met with locked iron gates, a keypad that flashed red in rejection, and a lawn choked with weeds where manicured gardens once bloomed. The stench hit me before I even saw the house properly, a sour, cloying odor of decay that spoke of neglect far deeper than untended flower beds. I didn't call out. I didn't ring the bell. A cold, professional instinct, honed from assessing risks in foreign ports, told me to observe first. I parked down the street and scaled the wall, the physical action a jarring echo of teenage rebellion, now a grim necessity. The inside of the house was a tomb of hot, stagnant air. The expensive central air system was silent, a luxury my parents had clearly decided was unnecessary. I moved through the darkened rooms, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. "Nana?" I called softly, the words swallowed by the oppressive silence. Her master suite, the sanctuary with a view of her beloved garden, had been gutted. In place of her California king bed and antique vanity was a shrine to my brother Trey. Sneakers lined like trophies, DJ equipment where her prayer chair had once sat. Panic, sharp and cold, lanced through me. I ran, room to empty room, until I heard it. A low, pathetic whimper, the sound of a wounded animal emanating from the back of the hallway near the laundry room. It was the storage closet, a windless cell for winter coats and broken appliances. The door wasn't even locked properly, just closed, as if what was inside was an afterthought. The smell that bloomed when I opened that door will live in my soul forever. It was the smell of human despair, urine, unwashed flesh, and the dank, sweet scent of mold. On a thin, stained mattress directly on the floor lay Nana Rose. She was curled into herself, a skeletal figure shivering in the Atlanta heat. Her magnificent silver hair was a matted nest. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. "Nana," I breathed, dropping to my knees. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused, and she flinched, a conditioned response that shattered my world. She whispered my brother's name. Trey? Expecting another demand, another cruelty. "No, Nana. It's Dante. I'm here." I touched her arm, and the paper-thin skin, stretched over brittle bone, was a tactile horror. This was not just neglect. This was a systematic dismantling of a human being. Dehydration, severe malnutrition. This was a crime scene, and the perpetrators were on a beach in Jamaica. Adrenaline, colder and more focused than any I'd felt in a business negotiation, took over. I sprinted to the kitchen for water. As I reached for a glass, a bright yellow sticky note on the fridge door caught my eye. It was in my mother's elegant, familiar script, the same handwriting that had once signed my school reports. The message was succinct, monstrous in its banality. "Don't feed her too much. It's expensive. Just give her water." I stared at the words, my vision tunneling. This wasn't a rushed note. It was a policy, a calculated decision to starve the woman who owned the very roof over their heads. I crushed the paper in my fist, the paper crackling like a dry bone, then pulled out my phone. My hands, which had just hours ago signed a multi-million-dollar shipping contract, were steady as I dialed 911. Then I opened the camera app. I documented everything. The closet, the mattress, the empty water glass by her side, the sticky note. I was building a case, not as a grandson, but as a professional, assembling evidence of a catastrophic failure. The sirens cut through the quiet Buckhead night, their blue and red lights painting the overgrown estate in garish, accusatory colors. Before the paramedics arrived, my neighbor, Mrs. Montgomery, appeared in a silk robe, clutching her phone and shrieking about calling the police on the thug who'd broken in. I didn't look up from Nana's pulse, which fluttered weakly under my fingers. "Mrs. Montgomery," I said, my voice low and utterly calm, "if you do not clear the way for that ambulance, I will personally sue you for obstruction of emergency services. Do you understand?" The recognition in her eyes, the boy who mowed her lawn, the one she'd dismissed, was immediate, and she fell silent. The EMTs took over, their professionalism a stark contrast to the domestic hell they'd entered. Nana was so light, she barely dented the stretcher. I climbed into the back of the ambulance, my eyes locked on her face, my mind already sifting through the variables, the liabilities, the assets. The $5,000 I sent every month, clean money earned from sweat and strategy, had not been used for her care. It had funded their lifestyle, while they treated her as a draining liability. At Grady Memorial, under the sterile, unforgiving fluorescent lights, I was treated as a suspect. Dr. Sterling, a man with tired eyes, blocked my path, citing bed sores, malnutrition, dehydration, a clear case for Adult Protective Services. He thought I was the monster. Without a word, I handed him my passport, thick with Brazilian entry stamps, and my boarding pass from the flight that had landed mere hours ago. The evidence was irrefutable. His demeanor shifted from accusation to a weary pity. "I'm sorry," he said, and the apology was for the world, not just for me. I sank into a plastic chair, the smells of antiseptic and waxed floors churning my stomach. Needing a distraction, I scrolled through my phone. An Instagram notification flashed. Trey was live. I tapped it, and my screen filled with a panorama of obscene joy. White sand, turquoise water, my father Marcus in linen, my mother Beatrice laughing with a cocktail, Trey hoisting a bottle of Ace of Spades. "Living our best life," Trey shouted to the camera. "Big shout out to the family trust." The bottle cost $500. The family trust was Nana's life savings, her credit cards, her dignity. I watched them toast, dance, and bask in stolen luxury, while the woman who provided it fought for breath 10 miles away. In that moment, a profound, glacial clarity settled over me. The sadness evaporated, the shock burned away. All that remained was a cold, hard purpose. I opened my contacts and scrolled to the one person Nana had always trusted, Arthur Sterling, her attorney for 40 years. The game was on. I needed to see their faces when they lied. I video called my father from the hospital hallway. The call connected to a blur of sun and sea, my father's face flushed with alcohol and vacation. "Yo, Dante," he boomed. "Look who decided to check in from the jungle. You seeing this view, boy? Jamaica, baby." I asked where Nana was. The lie flowed smooth as the champagne in his glass. "Oh, she's good, son. Living it up at Silver Lake, the 5-star facility in Buckhead. Cost a fortune, but nothing but the best for Mama Rose." I didn't respond. I simply walked into Nana's room, flipped the camera, and showed him the truth. The IV drip, the oxygen mask, the skeletal form of his mother. I let the image hang in the digital space between paradise and hell. "She's not at Silver Lake, Dad. She's at Grady Memorial. The doctors say she hasn't eaten in weeks. She was locked in the storage closet." I waited for remorse. I got annoyance. "Why you gotta be like this, Dante?" he snapped. "We needed a break. You don't know how hard it is." My mother chimed in, complaining I was ruining her trip. Then Trey's wife, Brittany, snatched the phone, her face contorted with venom. "She's a burden, Dante. She's dead weight. She's 85 years old. She's gonna die anyway. Who cares if it's today or next week?" The cruelty was breathtaking in its nakedness. "You have 24 hours," I said, my voice flat and final. "Be in this hospital room, or I give everything to the police." I hung up. A text buzzed immediately from Trey. "You think you're tough? If you touch my safe, I'll kill you. Stay out of the basement." The safe. That was the invitation. I drove back to the house, my mind a map of its contours. I found the new bulkhead padlock, cheap and easily broken. The basement was a hoarder's paradise, but my logistics-trained eye saw the discrepancy, a false wall. Behind a disconnected water heater, I found Trey's black market kingdom, electronics, designer bags, and in the corner, under dirty laundry, an old Diebold floor safe. Not Trey's, Grandpa's. I knelt, the combination from 20 years ago rising from memory like a ghost. "For when you're the man of the house, Dante, just for you." The tumblers clicked. Inside, no cash or gold, but a manila envelope. The contents were a financial autopsy, foreclosure notices, a third mortgage for millions, the house leveraged to the hilt and drowning. Beneath it lay Nana's prayer journal, the final entry, 2 days old, written in a shaking hand stained with tears. "Trey hit me today. He twisted my arm until I screamed because I wouldn't give him the pin. He said I'm useless. He said I should just die and give them the house. I'm so hungry. They locked the door again. I wish Dante would come home. Please, God, send Dante home." The words didn't spark rage. They crystallized it into a diamond-hard resolve. This was torture. This was a capital case. I had the evidence. Now I needed the power. They returned not with contrition, but with irritation, complaining about coach flights and a ruined catamaran cruise. Their tans looked garish under the house lights. "Did you go to the hospital?" I asked. My mother sighed about needing to shower and practice self-care to be her best advocate. The hypocrisy was staggering. I confronted them with the safe, the journal. Panic flickered in Trey's eyes just as Dr. Sterling arrived with police, detailing Nana's defensive wounds, launching a criminal investigation. My family's looks of hate confirmed I was now the enemy. But they had a weapon, a durable power of attorney, signed by a shaky, coerced hand, giving my father complete control. His first act? Moving Nana to Shady Pines, a warehouse for the forgotten. They were sending her there to die faster. Arthur confirmed the POA was legally formidable. "You need to buy time, Dante. Keep her alive until she can revoke it. If she dies before she speaks, they win." So I became a fortress. I hired private, armed security for her room with one instruction: no family, period. 3 nights later, they caught Trey in the hallway with a syringe of clear liquid, potassium or insulin, something to stop a weak heart. He claimed they were vitamins. I held the syringe to his face. "Tell Dad if he tries to move her, I give this to the police." Trey spat threats and ran. They were getting desperate. Then, on the 3rd morning, Nana woke up. Her eyes were clear, sharp. "Where are they?" she asked, her voice a rasp of steel. "The ones who put me in the dark?" I told her everything. The fire I remembered from my childhood reignited in her gaze. She devised a strategy. "When they come, I am not Rose the matriarch. I am Rose, the confused old woman who loves her golden boy. You play the villain. Let them think they've won." It was a masterstroke. An hour later, they burst in. Nana's performance was Oscar-worthy. She wailed for Trey, pointed a trembling finger at me, called me the bad man who scared her. They bought it completely, smirking in triumph as security escorted me out. As I left, I heard Nana pull Trey close and whisper, "The bank accounts are empty, but the gold is safe, under the old oak tree. Bars of it, just for you, baby." I saw the raw, stupid hunger ignite in his eyes. The trap was set. At 2 a.m., I watched from an upstairs window as Trey and Brittany, in designer clothes, destroyed the garden under the oak tree, digging frantically for a fortune that didn't exist. They hit metal, the old pressurized septic tank main. The ground erupted in a geyser of 30 years of sewage, coating them in a black, reeking sludge. It was poetic justice, filmed in high definition from my window. Their humiliation was complete, but my father's next move was audacious. A belated birthday gala for Nana at the estate, a thinly veiled open house for developers. He told me I was banned. I played the subdued son, offering to fund the entire extravagant event as a peace offering, handing him a blank check of my remorse. Greed trumped suspicion, as always. They spent my money on ice sculptures and lobster, believing they were cementing their victory. While they planned menus, I curated the guest list. I invited the ghosts. Big Sal Romano, the loan shark my father owed 50 grand. Chloe, the pregnant hostess Trey had abandoned. Mr. Henderson, the contractor he'd swindled. I wanted an audience for the collapse. The party was a grotesque parody of wealth. I arrived with Olivia, a razor-sharp attorney, my suit worth more than my father's car. The hush was palpable. I let them flaunt their illusion, then positioned myself to hear my father pitch the house to a developer, Mr. Thorne. Once she passes, the deed's mine. You could bulldoze this place, put up condos. Thorne casually dismantled him. What about the $2 million third mortgage that's 90 days past due? How do you sell a title about to be foreclosed? My father's face went slack. Chaos, meticulously orchestrated, erupted. Chloe arrived, hurling photos of her pregnancy and Trey across the buffet. Brittany attacked her, a screaming, clawing mess. As security intervened, Big Sal cornered my father, demanding his money by midnight. The facade was in ruins. I stepped onto the bandstand and took the microphone. Feedback screeched. The guest of honor has a few words. I signaled my technician. The massive screen flickered to life with a live feed from Nana's hospital room. There she was, in a silk robe, eyes blazing. "I am not dead yet," her voice crackled over the sound system. She addressed them directly, condemning their greed, their betrayal. Then, Arthur Sterling appeared on screen, holding up court documents, an emergency revocation of the power of attorney, and a restraining order. The legal ground evaporated beneath them. As they reeled, detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit entered, arresting my father and Trey for fraud and forgery. The evidence from the safe had done its work. My father, handcuffed, spat at me. "You're destroying your own inheritance." I leaned close. "You're not the owner, Marcus. The bank foreclosed on your mortgage this morning. They sold the debt." I paused, letting the silence gather. "To my conglomerate. I bought the debt, I own the note, and I am evicting you for breach of contract. This is not your house. It's mine." The revelation that the son they viewed as a mere logistics manager was the architect of their ruin struck them dumb. I gave them 30 minutes to collect their things and leave. In the ensuing scramble, I followed Brittany upstairs as she smashed Nana's antique vanity for a hidden jewelry box. As we struggled, her bag spilled, revealing not just diamonds, but vials of succinylcholine and sedatives, drugs used to induce paralysis and mimic natural decline in the elderly. She had been poisoning Nana. The detective on site arrested her for attempted homicide. Trey, seeing his wife's betrayal and his own hopelessness, broke completely. Downstairs, my mother, Beatrice, performed her final act, kneeling, sobbing, claiming victimhood. I offered her a choice: testify against my father and Trey as a state witness, or go to prison with them. Without hesitation, she signed the plea agreement, condemning her husband of 30 years to save herself. She walked out, leaving him weeping in his handcuffs, a final transactional love that had rotted our family core. A week later, the house cleansed and restored, I brought Nana home. She wept quiet tears of relief in her sunroom, the smell of jasmine tea replacing the memory of decay. I told her I was staying, moving the company headquarters to Atlanta. She was not going to be alone. Arthur visited with the final piece, a new will. To prevent contestation, we used the dollar clause, leaving my father, mother, and brother exactly $1 each, a legal assessment of their worth to her. Nana signed with a steady, triumphant hand. The aftermath was a quiet justice. My father and brother received long prison sentences. Trey, his arrogance useless behind bars, was quickly beaten into a quieter existence. Brittany was convicted on the drug charges. My mother, avoiding jail, was left destitute, working as a dishwasher in a diner, calling my blocked number nightly with pleas that went unanswered. They were ghosts. 1 year later, we celebrated Nana's 86th birthday on the estate lawn. There were no socialites, just real friends, nurses, neighbors, Arthur. We ate simple food, sang off-key, and laughed. As she blew out her candles, she squeezed my hand. She wished for peace. And finally, she had it. I stood at the edge of the patio, a glass of cheap, sweet wine in my hand, and toasted the emptiness where my blood family once stood. I understood now that family has nothing to do with shared DNA and everything to do with shared values, with showing up. Blood is just a blueprint. Real family is a choice. They thought I just moved boxes. They never understood that my real expertise was in waste management. I took a sip, the flavor simple and true. And that is how I took out the trash. The quiet that settled over the estate in the months that followed was not an absence, but a presence. It was the sound of peace, thick and real as the new magnolia blossoms. Mornings began with the smell of coffee and bacon, not the tense silence of withheld affection or the clinking of jewelry being appraised for pawn. I moved into the guest house, as I'd promised, but the main house felt more like mine than it ever had before. It was no longer a stage for performance, but a home for recovery. Nana's strength returned slowly, a daily miracle measured in the gradual firmness of her handshake, the ease with which she could rise from her chair, and the return of the shrewd, assessing light in her eyes when we discussed the business. The business, of course, was the other anchor of our new life. Relocating International Logistics Holdings to Atlanta was not merely a sentimental gesture. It was, as I'd told her, a sound strategic pivot. The port of Savannah was booming, a vital artery for East Coast trade, and establishing a command center here positioned us perfectly between European and Asian markets. My partners in Sao Paulo were initially skeptical, but the numbers, the favorable tax climate, the logistical efficiency, the burgeoning tech scene, won them over. What they didn't see in the spreadsheets was my primary asset, a renewed, ferocious focus. The cold fury that had fueled my takeover of the estate had tempered into a steel-hard resolve. I had fought for something real, and it had honed my instincts. Negotiations felt simpler, risks clearer. I was no longer just building wealth, I was fortifying a sanctuary. Arthur Sterling became a fixture, stopping by for chess with Nana or to review the endless legal aftermath over a glass of bourbon on the porch. The civil suits were settled quickly. Facing criminal convictions, my father and Trey had no leverage. The house was indisputably mine, the mortgages cleared. The remaining, untainted portions of Nana's estate, her modest savings, the intellectual property of her old hair care formulas, were formally transferred into a trust we managed together. One afternoon, Arthur handed me a final, thin document. It was the official notice from the probate court. The will with the dollar clause had been accepted without contest. "Seems your family finally understood the cost of litigation," he said dryly, tapping the paper. Or more likely, they couldn't find a lawyer to take their case on credit. I filed it away without ceremony. It was a receipt, nothing more. The outside world, however, had a morbid fascination with our story. The fall of the Buckhead Wilsons had been juicy, if brief, local news. A few tabloid-style blogs tried to dig up dirt, painting me as a ruthless son who'd orchestrated his family's downfall for financial gain. They'd get fragments, the arrests, the foreclosure, the dramatic party, but they never grasped the core truth, the storage closet, the sticky note, the septic tank of greed. We gave no interviews. Olivia, my attorney, issued a single statement on our behalf. "This is a private family matter pertaining to the safety and well-being of Mrs. Rosemary Wilson. No further comment will be made." Silence was our shield. Let them speculate. We were too busy living. Nana's garden became her kingdom again. With a wide-brimmed hat and a new ergonomic trowel, she directed a team of gardeners.
not with the imperiousness of old, but with the gentle authority of a general who has seen the worst of the war and now tends to her peace. She had me install raised beds so she wouldn't have to bend. We planted heirloom tomatoes, okra, and rows of the vibrant azaleas that had been bulldozed. The act of putting things back into the earth felt like a sacrament. Sometimes I'd look out from my home office window and see her there, her hands in the soil, her face tilted to the sun, and a feeling of profound rightness would settle in my chest. This was the victory. Not the deed, not the bank balance, but this quiet, sun-dappled moment. I did not forget them, the ghosts in the system. Periodic updates came, impersonal and bureaucratic. Notification of facility transfers, medical reports, requests for visitation denials. I handled them with the same detachment as a customs form. Trey, in a desperate bid for protection or comfort, continued to write. The letters, increasingly smudged and incoherent, transitioned from demands for money to rambling reminiscences of childhood, apologies that felt scripted, pleas for a Bible or a photograph. I never responded. I read each one by the fire pit, then let the flames consume the paper. It was not an act of hatred, but of hygiene. His words were a toxin, a last feeble attempt to infiltrate the peace we had built. I would not allow it. My mother's attempts were more persistent, a buzzing gnat against a fortified window. The burner phone calls eventually stopped, replaced by handwritten letters sent to my business address, her once elegant script now cramped and desperate. They were masterclasses in manipulation, cycling through guilt. I carried you for 9 months. Victimhood. They forced me, Dante. You know how he was. And finally, a staggering, transparent greed. A small investment in a franchise just to get back on my feet. You'll own a percentage. I had Olivia draft a cease and desist letter threatening a harassment suit. The letter stopped. According to a discreet investigator I occasionally employed, she had moved in with a fringe relative in Macon, working as a cashier at a discount store. The report included a grainy photo of her leaving work, shoulders hunched against a range she could no longer afford an umbrella for. I felt a distant pang, not of sympathy, but of a bleak cosmic symmetry. She had sold everything for appearance. Now she had neither. It was a Tuesday in late autumn when the past made its final, concrete attempt to breach our walls. I was reviewing a freight contract when my desk line rang, an internal line from the gate intercom. My security chief, a stoic ex-Marine named Walsh I'd hired to manage the estate's new, discreet but comprehensive system, spoke evenly. "Mr. Wilson, there's a gentleman at the south gate, a pastor, says he's visiting from the correctional facility and needs to speak with you regarding Marcus Wilson Sr. He's insistent." My first instinct was to have him sent away, but the title gave me pause. It was either a new low in their manipulation or something genuine. Verify his credentials with the institution directly. If he checks out, escort him to the guest house veranda. I'll meet him there. 20 minutes later, I sat across from a weary-looking man in his 60s with kind eyes and a worn leather Bible, Reverend Miller. His credentials were valid. He was a part-time chaplain at the prison. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Wilson," he began, his voice soft. "I don't make a habit of this, but your father, he's taken a turn. It's not medical, it's spiritual, or the lack thereof." He explained that after the last appeal was denied, my father had fallen into a profound, silent despair. He refused all chapel visits, all group sessions. He sits in his cell, he said, and he just repeats 2 things. Sometimes he whispers them, sometimes he shouts them. The safe was empty, and my son owns the house. The chaplain leaned forward, his hands clasped. I believe he's confronting a void he spent a lifetime trying to fill with things. He's not asking for you. He may not even be capable of it. But I am asking you, as a matter of human compassion, is there anything, a letter, a message, something to break the loop? I looked past him to where the first amber leaves of fall were drifting onto the lawn Nana loved. I thought of the sticky note. I thought of the champagne toasts in Jamaica.
I thought of the sound the Diebold safe made when it opened to reveal not treasure, but proof of his failure. The anger was gone, burned away. What remained was a vast, cool emptiness. "Reverend," I said, my voice calm, "you are mistaking a crisis of consequence for a crisis of conscience. My father is not mourning the pain he caused. He is mourning the loss of the assets he caused it for. The safe is empty because he emptied it. I own the house because he mortgaged it to pay for his illusion. He is not in a spiritual loop. He is at the end of a logical chain of events he himself set in motion." I stood up, a signal the audience was over. "Tell him the truth. Tell him the safe was always empty, and tell him his son is home." I watched the Reverend's car disappear down the winding driveway. There was no catharsis in the moment, no weight lifted. It was merely an administrative closure, the final filing of a long-concluded case. I walked to the main house and found Nana in the sunroom working on a crossword puzzle. She looked up, sensing my mood. "Trouble with a shipment?" she asked. "No, Nana," I said, sitting across from her. "Just some residual paperwork, all handled." She studied me for a moment, then nodded, returning to her puzzle. She didn't press. We had learned the value of unburdened silence. That winter, we hosted a small Christmas gathering. It was Arthur and his wife, Walsh and his family, a few of Nana's oldest friends from her church days. The house was warm with the scent of pine and gingerbread, alive with the chatter of children. Walsh's two young boys who raced through the halls with a glee that felt like an exorcism. As I handed out gifts, I caught Nana's eye. She was watching the boys, a smile playing on her lips, but her eyes were glistening. Later, after the guests had left and we were bundling up trash, she touched my arm. "You gave me back more than my house, Dante. You gave me back the sound of laughter in these halls. I thought that sound was gone forever." The following spring, on a day bursting with dogwood blossoms, I had a visitor of a different kind. A young woman, sharp-eyed and professional, stood in my office. She was a documentary filmmaker, interested in stories of justice and resilience. She'd heard fragments of our story, she said. She wanted to give us a platform to show the human cost of elder abuse and financial predation. "Your triumph could help others," she urged. I listened politely. Then I shook my head. "Our story isn't a triumph," I corrected her gently. "It's a salvage operation. We're not a case study. We're just a grandmother and her grandson who decided to stop living in a crime scene. What happened in this house was a private atrocity. Making it public would only give the ghosts a microphone." I walked her to the door. "Help others by promoting the laws, the social workers, the support systems, not by exploiting the wreckage." As the years turned, the estate became something new, a thriving, quiet hub. My company grew, branching into sustainable logistics, a venture that felt like building rather than just moving. Nana, against all odds, seemed to grow stronger. She took up painting, terrible, joyful watercolors of her garden that I had framed and hung in the guest house. We traveled, not to lavish resorts, but to places she'd always wanted to see. The Carolina coast, the Blue Ridge Mountains. One trip, we even went to Rio. I showed her the bustling port of Santos, the mountains that hugged the city. She watched me negotiate in rapid Portuguese with a stevedore captain, and later, over dinner, she grinned. "You were never just a logistics manager, were you?" I just smiled and squeezed her hand. The letters from prison eventually ceased. The investigators' reports became annual, then stopped altogether. They had faded into the system, their fates no longer tethered to ours. We were free. On the evening of Nana's 90th birthday, we sat on the patio as fireflies performed their ancient dance over the lawn. The party had been simple and perfect. She was tired, but radiant. "Dante," she said, her voice still clear, "I need to tell you something. I'm not afraid anymore. Not of the dark, not of being alone, not of what comes next. You lifted all those fears." I tried to speak, but she held up a hand. "When you are my age, you get to say these things. This house, this life you built around me, it's the greatest gift. But the greatest gift was you choosing to be my family when yours chose not to be. She passed in her sleep, a peaceful year later, a gentle exit after a turbulent voyage. The house felt different without her, but not empty. It was full of her essence, her paintings, her garden, the specific way the light fell in her sunroom at 4 in the afternoon. Her will was executed without a hitch. I donated the bulk of her remaining estate to a foundation for elder abuse prevention and legal aid in her name. The house remained mine, but its purpose had shifted. It was no longer just a home, it was a monument to a repaired world. One afternoon, a few months after she was gone, I was clearing out a drawer in her old desk and found a sealed envelope with my name on it in her firm, final handwriting. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small, worn key taped to it. The note read, Dante, the real safe, the oak tree. Dig 3 feet east of the trunk at the root that looks like an old man's knee. Love always, Nana. My heart hammered in a way it hadn't in years. I took a shovel and went to the majestic oak, now stronger than ever. I found the gnarled root and dug. 3 feet down, the shovel struck metal. It was a small, heavy, military-grade lockbox crusted with dirt. The key fit. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was not gold, but something more valuable. There were the original signed patents for her hair care formulas. There were faded photographs of my grandfather, of her as a young entrepreneur. And there was a stack of old stock certificates, brittle but legible, for a now-defunct steel company. A note atop them, in her hand, my first investment, never sold, for my grandson, the builder. I sat back on the grass, the relics of her real legacy in my hands, and I laughed, a sound that mixed wonder with a deep, aching love. They had dug frantically for fool's gold and found only waste. I had, without knowing, been sitting atop the real treasure all along, not in the ground, but in the woman who had waited to share it until I'd proven what I valued. It was never about the money. It was about the truth. I had the certificates appraised. They were worthless as stock, but as historical documents, a collector paid a surprisingly large sum for them. I used the money to endow a scholarship in her name at the local technical college for single parents studying business. The story, our story, ends here, not with a bang, but the quiet hum of a well-tuned life. I still live on the estate. I run my company, I tend her garden. Sometimes in the deep quiet of the evening, I pour a glass of that cheap, sweet Merlot and stand on the patio. I raise it to the memory of the woman who taught me that strength is a quiet thing, and to the ruins of the family that taught me what it must defend against. They thought I was just moving boxes. They never understood I was building a fortress, planting a garden, and learning once and for all how to take out the trash. Cheers. The weight of the lockbox in my hands there on the soft earth beneath the oak tree felt like the closing of a circle. The frantic, sewage-soaked digging of my brother had been a grotesque pantomime of greed, a desperate lunge for a phantom. My own digging, guided by love and a final message, unearthed the true inheritance, not monetary wealth, but the evidence of a resilient soul. The patents, the photos, the stubbornly held stocks, they were the archaeological record of Nana Rose's true character, a character my family had tried to bury under neglect and lies. I sat with the box in my study for a long time, the artifacts arranged before me. They didn't fill a void because she hadn't left one. Instead, they amplified the presence she had cultivated in my life. The scholarship fund established in her name felt like the most authentic continuation of her legacy, a hand extended, not a vault sealed. Life, in its relentless forward motion, began to weave new patterns over the old scars. The estate, no longer a site of rescue or repair, matured into a simple, beautiful home. I hired a part-time horticulturist to maintain the gardens to Nana's exacting standards, and I often found myself joining him, the physical labor of pruning and planting a meditation. The business continued to thrive, but my role evolved. With a strong executive team in place, I stepped back from day-to-day firefighting. The hunger that had driven me to prove myself, to escape, to conquer, had been satisfied, or perhaps transformed. Now I focused on long-term strategy and the ventures that sparked something deeper than profit. A green logistics initiative aimed at decarbonizing port operations, a partnership with a nonprofit to streamline aid delivery to disaster zones. It was work that felt like building, not just battling.
It was through this work that I met Ilara. She was the founder of the nonprofit, a force of nature with a physicist's mind for systems and a poet's heart for their human impact. We were introduced on a contentious video call about cargo space allocations for medical supplies to a flood-ravaged region. She was fiercely pragmatic, refusing to be swayed by sentiment, yet her entire being was animated by a profound sense of compassion. We argued, we found consensus, and by the end of the call, I knew I wanted to hear her argue about everything forever. Our relationship unfolded not in the glittering social scenes of my past, but over spreadsheets in my office, late-night calls coordinating shipments, and quiet dinners where talk of logistics gave way to talk of life. Bringing her to the estate for the first time was a moment of profound vulnerability. This was the ground zero of my history, the place where I had been both victim and victor. I showed her everything. The sunroom, the patio where the disastrous party had been, even the closet, now a well-organized pantry. I told her the whole story, sparing no detail. The sticky note, the safe, the septic dizer, the dollar clause. She listened, her intelligent eyes missing nothing. When I finished, she didn't offer pity or horror. She took my hand and said, "You built a life out of the rubble. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." In her, I found not someone to protect me from my past, but someone who understood that the past was the foundation, not the footprint. We married 2 years later in the garden, under the oak tree. It was a small ceremony. Arthur gave me away, in a manner of speaking. Walsh's boys were the ring bearers. The only family present was the one I had chosen. As I said my vows, my gaze swept across the faces of friends, colleagues, the people who had shown up, and finally to Ilara's radiant, steady face. The ghosts were absent. They had no invitation here. The birth of our daughter, Rosa, named without question for the woman who made my life possible, brought a new, fierce kind of joy to the estate. The sound of an infant's cry, then a toddler's laughter, completed the reclamation. The halls that had echoed with silence, then with conflict, then with a fragile peace, now rang with the chaotic, beautiful music of a family living in truth. I would often find Ilara in Nana's sunroom, nursing Rosa, a watercolor painting of magnolias hanging above them. The continuum was visible, tangible. I never sought out news of my blood relatives, but the world, in its small way, occasionally delivered it. A former associate, knowing nothing of my history, mentioned casually over lunch that he'd done some consulting work for a mid-sized prison system. "Had a real piece of work," he said, shaking his head. "Fellow named Wilson, always drafting these insane legal motions, claiming diplomatic immunity, trying to lean imaginary assets. The guards called him the ambassador, a real tragic case." I simply nodded, took a sip of water, and steered the conversation to port tariffs. The information was a fossil, a curiosity. It held no power. Trey was released on parole after serving his full term, his golden boy sheen long since oxidized to a dull institutional gray. The investigator's final report, which I had not requested but which arrived as part of a closing package, noted that he moved to a halfway house in a small town in Alabama. He worked as a stock clerk in a hardware store. He was, according to the report, remarkably quiet and incurious. The descriptor struck me. Incurious.
The defining trait of his life had been a voracious appetite for what was not his. Now it seemed he had no appetite at all. Brittany, I learned through a legal bulletin, had her sentence extended for a fight in the prison laundry. She would be inside for a long time yet. My mother's trail went cold somewhere in Central Florida. There were no more letters. The channels were closed. One rainy autumn afternoon, when Rosa was 5, I was cleaning out the attic of the guest house, a final repository of boxes that had been shuffled but never fully processed. Behind a rack of old winter coats, I found a single dust-covered banker's box with my father's name scrawled on the side in marker. I hadn't put it there. It must have been a last forgotten stash from before the eviction. With a sense of detached curiosity, I cut the brittle tape. Inside were not mementos or secrets, but the pathetic tools of his facade. Glossy brochures for luxury cars he never owned, embossed invitations to galas he'd crashed, counterfeit watch catalogs, and at the very bottom, a thick, leather-bound planner. I flipped it open. It was filled not with appointments, but with elaborate, delusional budgets and projections. Projected dividend from Mama's trust, estimated sale price of estate post-renovation, capital for venture fund post-inheritance, page after page of financial castles built on the sand of her mortality. The final entry was dated the week before I arrived from Brazil. It simply read, "Liquidity event imminent. Hold firm." He was waiting for her to die, coldly, clinically waiting. I closed the book. There was no rage left, but a profound, weary sadness for the small, hollow man he had chosen to be. I carried the box down to the fire pit and burned its contents without ceremony. The past could keep its ghosts. I would not provide them an archive. The true legacy of those years, I realized, was not in the property or the peace, but in the lessons etched into my bones. I taught Rosa those lessons not as a grim history, but as principles of navigation. We take care of what's ours, I'd tell her as we weeded the garden. We see people for what they do, not what they say, I'd explain when a friend proved fickle. And most importantly, family is a choice you make every day. She grew up knowing the broad strokes of her father's past, that there had been unkind people, that Nana Rose had been very brave, that Daddy had to be brave too to make a safe home. The specifics could wait until she was older, until they were just stories without the power to wound. On the 10th anniversary of Nana's passing, Ilara and I took Rosa to the cemetery. It was a bright, blustery day. We placed flowers by the simple headstone that read, "Rosemary Wilson, beloved matriarch, fierce spirit." As Rosa chattered to her grandmother about school and her pet rabbit, I felt Ilara's hand slip into mine. "She would be so proud of you," she whispered. "Of this," she gestured, not at the stone, but at the three of us, a unit forged in love and intention. I looked at my daughter's animated face, at my wife's steady gaze, and then back at the name carved in granite. The journey from that storage closet to the sun-dappled hillside felt epic in scale, yet the destination was deceptively simple. It was just a family standing together. No villains, no victims, just people who had chosen each other. The battles were all in the past. The man who had fought them, the logistics manager, the debt buyer, the evictor, the protector, had slowly receded, making room for the husband, the father, the man tending a garden. We drove home as the afternoon light turned golden. Rosa fell asleep in the back seat. As we turned onto Pacey's Ferry Road and the iron gates of the estate swung open silently, I felt the familiar, warm sense of arrival. The house stood, not as a fortress anymore, but as a testament. It had witnessed the worst of human nature and had been reclaimed for the best. The oak tree stood sentinel, its roots now guarding a different kind of secret. Not gold, but the proof that from even the most poisoned ground, something strong and beautiful could grow. I carried Rosa inside, her head heavy on my shoulder, and laid her on the sofa in the sunroom. Ilara brought a blanket. We stood together, watching our daughter sleep in the very spot where her great-grandmother had once fought her way back to life. The circle was not just closed, it was spiraling forward, wider and stronger. There were no more enemies to outmaneuver, no more debts to collect, no more trash to take out. There was only this: the quiet hum of a home, the promise of tomorrow, and the deep, abiding peace of a story that had finally, truly reached its end. And it was enough. It was more than enough. The years that followed were not without their challenges, but they were the ordinary, navigable kind. A business downturn weathered through careful strategy, a scare when Rosa broke her arm falling from the magnolia tree she'd been forbidden to climb, the slow, sweet decline of Arthur Sterling, who passed in his sleep at 94, a final legal pad on his nightstand with notes for a case he'd never argue. These were the textures of a real life, woven with threads of concern, joy, and inevitable loss. The past, with its jagged, traumatic edges, had been smoothed by time and care into something that resembled history, a story we owned, rather than one that owned us. Rosa grew, inheriting her mother's analytical precision and, to my quiet delight, a streak of Nana's unshowy grit. She was fascinated by the world, by how things connected. At 14, for a school project on supply chains, she didn't choose something simple, like a sneaker. She chose the global flower trade, tracing a rose from a Kenyan greenhouse to an Atlanta supermarket cooler, mapping the flights, the auctions, the customs forms. She presented her findings at the dinner table with a whiteboard and markers, her eyes alight. "It's logistics, Dad," she said, as if revealing a profound secret. "It's all just beautiful, complicated logistics." In that moment, seeing my passion reflected and refined in her, I felt a surge of a future I hadn't dared to envision. It was Rosa, in her relentless curiosity, who eventually asked the question I had long anticipated but never truly prepared for. We were in my study, a room that had once been my father's domain of pretense, now lined with books on maritime law and sustainable engineering. She was helping me sort through a box of old company files for archival. Her fingers, delicate and sure, brushed against a manila folder tucked at the very bottom, one I had forgotten. It contained the original, unredacted police report from the night I found Nana and a single, copied photograph of the storage closet. She didn't open it, but her eyes lingered on the label. She looked up at me, her teenage face a canvas of thoughtful intensity. "Dad," she began, her voice careful, "Mom and you have told me the story about the bad people and Nana being sick and you saving her and the house." She paused, choosing her words with the same care she'd used in her flower trade analysis. "But they weren't just bad people, were they? They were your family, your father, your mother, your brother. I've looked at the math, the genetics. That makes them my family too." She didn't sound accusatory, just profoundly curious. What do I do with that? The room was silent, except for the whisper of the central air. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking. This was the moment I had subconsciously steeled myself for since the day she was born. How do you explain poisoned roots without frightening the sapling? I said, "You're right," my voice steady. "Genetically, yes, they are your blood relations. But Rosa, family is a much richer, more complex ecosystem than shared DNA. DNA is a blueprint, a set of potential instructions. But a blueprint for a house isn't a home. A home is built with choice, with care, with daily acts of love and maintenance." I gestured around the study, toward the window that framed the garden. This house had a blueprint, and for a while, people lived here who followed a very different set of instructions, ones for selfishness, for taking, for seeing people as objects. They nearly destroyed the house. My job, and my greatest honor, was to follow a different set of instructions, Nana Rose's instructions, ones for resilience, for loyalty, for building something that lasts. She listened, absorbing. "So, I don't owe them anything?" she asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. "You owe them exactly what they earned, which is the understanding that some people choose a path that makes them unsafe to love. You owe them the wisdom to recognize that path in others and the strength to protect your own peace. You don't owe them your time, your energy, or a place in your story. Your obligation is to the family you choose to build, just as mine was." She nodded slowly, then a small, wry smile touched her lips. So they're like a bad subcontractor on a job site. You fire them, you don't hire them again, and you make sure the foundations they messed up are solid before you build anything new on top. I couldn't help but laugh, a sound of pure relief and pride. That, I said, is a perfect analogy. The best I've ever heard. The question, once asked and answered, seemed to settle something for her. She filed the manila folder away without opening it, and we went back to sorting the company papers. The ghosts, once more, were acknowledged and dismissed. They had no hold on the next generation. Alara's nonprofit flourished, eventually merging with a larger international organization. She traveled more, but her homecomings were celebrations. Our life developed a rhythm of its own, separate from the dramatic beats of the past. We hosted fundraisers on the lawn for her causes, the estate now a venue for building futures rather than auctioning off a corpse of one. We took family trips, often incorporating my work. Rosa got to see the port of Savannah in action, the massive cranes moving containers with balleretic precision, and later the wind farm in Portugal we helped finance. The world was our classroom, and our family was its secure base camp. The quiet passing of my mother was noted in a 3-line obituary in a Florida weekly. It listed no surviving family. I read it online, felt a faint, distant tremor, like hearing about the demolition of a building you once got lost in as a child. There was no architecture left to mourn, only the empty space where something complicated had once stood. I did not attend any service. My mourning for her had happened long ago, in increments, with every withheld hug, every sold bicycle, every cruel whisper. The final notice was just administrative. It was Rosa, at 17, who initiated the final, unexpected act of reclamation. She was applying to colleges, her sights set on dual degrees in environmental engineering and international relations. One essay prompt asked her to describe a place that shaped her. She came to me, her laptop in hand. "I want to write about the oak tree," she said, "but not just about the bad stuff. I want to write about what grew after, about Nana's paintings and Mom's fundraisers under its branches, and how you taught me to climb it safely. Is that okay?" My throat tightened. "It's more than okay," I managed. "It's the truth." She wrote a stunning essay. It was clear-eyed about the past, but fundamentally forward-looking, a testament to resilience, not as a grim struggle, but as a creative, generative force. She got into every school she applied to. The night she made her decision, we celebrated on the patio. As twilight fell, she looked at me, her expression serious. "I was thinking, when I go, this place is so big, for just you and Mom." She took a deep breath. "I was reading about Nana's old formulas in the archives, the natural ingredients, the focus on hair health for women of color. What if, what if we revived it? Not as some huge brand, but as a social enterprise, a small production studio in the pool house, employing single mothers from the community, using ethically sourced materials. We could call it Rose's Legacy. It would make the house a workshop again, not a museum." Alara and I stared at her, then at each other. In our daughter's ambitious, compassionate plan, I saw the ultimate triumph. The estate, once a site of consumption and exploitation, would become a site of production and empowerment. The legacy of the woman who built a business from her kitchen to secure her future would fuel the futures of others. The cycle was complete, and it was benevolent. "I think," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "Nana Rose would absolutely love that." The project became our family's new shared venture. The renovated pool house hummed with activity. The first employees were women from a local shelter Alara's organization worked with. The small, elegant line of hair care products was a modest success, but its real impact was in the paychecks, the childcare co-op we helped establish, the sense of purpose it fostered. Rosa ran the operations remotely from college with the deft skill of a born logistician. The scent of shea butter and lavender sometimes drift across the lawn, a new, gentle perfume overlaying the jasmine and pine. Now, as I sit writing this in the same sunroom, an old man's bones beginning to protest the chill of a Georgia evening, I look back on the arc of it all. The desperate young man climbing a wall in the dark has become a grandfather. My daughter's child, a boy with Alara's curious eyes, is sleeping in the nursery that was once a forgotten guest room. The story that began with a crime scene ends here, with a cradle. The world might call it a revenge tale, a riches to rags to riches saga, but that's a superficial read. It was never about revenge. Revenge is a heat that consumes. This was about restoration, a cold, careful process of rebuilding something true on a foundation of lies. It was about the meticulous, unglamorous work of love, changing IV bags, holding a trembling hand, planting a garden, reading a bedtime story, signing a paycheck for a struggling mother. They thought I was just a logistics manager. In a way, they were right. My life's work has been about the efficient, ethical movement of resources, whether shipping containers across oceans, capital into worthy ventures, or a family from a place of profound danger to a place of unshakable safety. The final product, the delivered good, is this: a home where the locks are only used to keep the night out, not people in. A lineage defined not by blood, but by loyalty. A peace that is not the absence of noise, but the presence of harmony. I hear Alara laughing in the kitchen with Rosa, the soft clatter of dinner being prepared. My grandson will wake soon, and his cry will be a demand for love, not a plea for mercy. I will go to him. This is the logistics of my heart now. Simple, direct, unimpeded. The route is clear, the cargo is precious, and the destination, after such a long and turbulent voyage, is finally, blessedly, home.